Baylor had its best NFL draft in program history in year 2 under Dave Aranda, and 11 guys have now signed with the NFL as of this weekend. What does that do for recruiting? How do high school football players view the Baylor program as pumping guys out of the NFL? John Garcia Jr. joins Locked on Baylor.
You are Locked on Baylor, your daily podcast on the Baylor Bears, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Hey, what's going on, everybody? Drake Toll here from Sikkim365.com, joined today by John Garcia Jr., the director of recruiting from Sports Illustrated. I want to thank you for making Locked on Baylor your first listen every single day. And in today's show, we're going to get into Baylor's draft and how it plays into recruits, Gerry Bohanon and Blake Shapen conversation, and end it off with Matthew Meyer entering the transfer portal. But John, I tell you what, I don't know if you've heard, but if you're in the NFL, there's like a 1 in 5 chance you played for Baylor at one point in your career. Like, this whole draft was loaded this weekend, and you got to tell me this is huge for recruiting, right?
Absolutely, Drake. There's really no way to spin it otherwise. I think when you talk about recruits and what they value, certainly they want to develop, they want to win, they want to play. All those things make a lot of sense. They want to be on TV. But, man, the Sunday conversation comes up more and more and more as time goes on. So when you start to pump kids into the NFL and you start to become known for that, independent of Saturdays, it just creates another layer of things to sell. And that's something that has worked at so many schools for such a long time, right? If you're a wide receiver and you see what Ohio State and Alabama does at that position relative to Sundays, you're like, okay, if I have this offer, it means a little bit more. So as Baylor looks to build under Dave Aranda, that becomes a part of the conversation as well. And I think the high of 2021 on the field has to be supplemented by success in leading these kids to Sundays, which is something that I know Dave Aranda is aware of, and I know that's a part of his calculus in that wonderful brain of his, but it absolutely matters in recruiting because kids want to see it. It's one thing to sell it, but they want to see it. The tangible is very important in recruiting, and there's nothing more tangible than the NFL draft, right? It shows you value. There's money attached to it. There's prestige attached to it. It is kind of the all-encompassing thing when it regards to college success. You know, when you say who won the draft, you talk about NFL teams, but then you start to get into the colleges. And I think outside of the obvious, Georgia, Alabama, blah, 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 Baylor, Ole Miss, I mean, some of the schools that we're not used to talking about had as many, draftees as other teams combined, So I think, Baylor was, 5th or 6th overall in terms of the amount of players drafted. I mean, that is amazing to consider relative to where the program was even 2 years ago. And I think that's just another feather in the cap for Dave Aranda and company, another element to sell on the recruiting trail because now it's been done. It's tangible. And I think there are some things that transcend on-field success. The draft and the path to Sundays is certainly one of them. And now that's another strength of this Baylor program.
John, cue the NIL and players in college making money. Somebody tweeted this. I don't remember who. I wish I could give them credit. It was like, man, the reactions to the NFL draft were so much how do I put it? They were a lot less extravagant when the kids are like, dude, I was making $1 million last year. Now I'm making $2 million. Like, there are these players that have been are seeing the age of the NIL where it's like, all right, sweet. I'm just going to make a little bit more money than I've already been making. So in that, does NIL now trump draft stock, draft picks, your eligible, your possibility of being drafted out of a college?
That is a great question. I don't think it could ever do it from a holistic standpoint, like where every single kid will tell you, yes, I'd rather just make the money now and kind of be done with it. But I do think in certain situations you could start to craft that argument, especially now where, let's take this class of 2023, for example, kids are going into college with the possibility of NIL, where even 2 years ago that wasn't the case. I mean, we're still less than a year into the entire profiting platform. That is the NIL. I think it was July 1st of 2021. So I do think that as we learn more about it and we see some of these huge numbers being thrown out, it could start to slant the conversation towards, hey, I want to make the money now anyway, right? I mean, I'm good now. I feel good now. If I can go do it, I'm going to go do it. And then they view the NFL as just an extension of that. I do think that can come for a minority number of prospects. It'll be a small number. It will be kids who are already making money into the millions, which, I mean, I don't know. I don't have the statistics. I don't think a lot of it is public at this point. But let's say it's 5%. It's much less than that, but let's say it's 5%. I think for that group, yes, I do think the NIL value and money that you're getting right now can begin to feel a lot better than, having to play for it in the NFL under a specific contract that is tied to your availability, your health, your well-being, the legal system, the private, NFL legality system that is totally different. All of those things that for a lot of kids is really too much to handle. And that's why you see the lifespan so small, or short, I should say, in the NFL. So in one degree, yes, I think you can change your life financially in college now. So it does dampen a little bit of what you see at the draft. And I didn't even think about their reactions. That's a fantastic point. My mom actually was watching it, and she was like, it seems like they don't care as much. And I never put those two things together until you said it, Drake. And that's why you're the man. That's why you run this show.
Wow. The man from John Garcia Jr. That's my resume. You just made it to my resume.
Happy to be there.
John, there is a school in between San Antonio and Waco-ish that is burnt orange and has these big long horns, and they did not have anyone drafted this weekend. Now, granted, Baylor has had those years, right? This is not, I'm not here to just, for lack of a better, crap all over some other school. But Baylor had the most draft picks of any school in Texas this year. And Texas is the premier state, one of the top, at least 2 or 3, for high school recruits. How big is it then that Baylor was number 1 in that category?
Again, it just adds on to this kind of ride that Baylor has been on. And it does, the Baylor coaches won't say it. Dave Aranda won't say it. Look, good schools don't bring up other schools in recruiting, but we can certainly talk about it here. And it does matter because that information is certainly going to be spread throughout social media, and it gets into conversations, especially in a state like Texas, where there are so many options. And football is such a big part of the conversation as a whole. So yes, it matters. Anybody that tells you otherwise is kind of nuts. But all of the tangible numbers matter when it comes to football. How many games did you win? Who did you beat? What bowl game did you go to? How many draft picks did you have? How high did they go? How well are they doing in the NFL? We see that become a part of the conversation down the road as well. So all of that stuff factors in. So to ignore any one of those points would be naive. But that's what makes college football great. We get into these rivalry conversations and everything is on the table at that point. So another feather in the cap for Dave Aranda and company. Had nothing to do with them in terms of Texas not having anybody drafted. I mean, maybe the Saturday tape for the game did, but other than that, really nothing to do with them. But it does not hurt you on the trail. Again, I know people in Texas don't like this, but perceptionally, the state of Texas is wide open in college football. There is no dominant team. There has not been a dominant team in really 15 years from a consistency standpoint. So that door is wide open. So I'm sure what's coming up on the recruiting trail, especially right now, we're in the spring evaluation period, the whole why not Baylor thing is like, why not? There is no clearer path to Sundays, I should say, than Baylor based on what we just took in over the weekend for the NFL draft. And that's tangible. That's not opinion. It is objective and fact. And I think that matters as much as perception does in recruiting.
Well, John, the next thing I want to get into is Gerry Bohanon, Blake Shapen, the quarterback battle at Baylor that has ended with Blake Shapen being named the starter and Gerry Bohanon now transferring out of the program. But first, a message from our sponsors. All right, John, those were our sponsors that just went in right there. No read today, so it's a little funky, but we are at a Baylor quarterback crossroad that is now finished. You have the new starting quarterback. It's a new era of quarterback with Blake Shapen being named and Gerry Bohanon going into the transfer portal. I know that your forte is recruiting, but this certainly was pretty shocking for most people who follow college football. I don't know if anybody expected A, this, or B, it to go the way that it has, if that makes any sense.
Yeah, Drake. I mean, a couple of weeks ago, I wasn't even locked into the Baylor quarterback battle. I thought that, every good program has competition at every position at all times. That is 100% true. And we know the type of program Aranda wants to run. But to think that the guy who led you to historic heights just the other day, it feels like that guy would be number 2. Nobody expected that. Nobody expected that. I was not keyed in onto it until the last week or so. And I was like, oh, wow, that's actually a battle. Like, oh, okay, let's tune in. And then, you watch the spring game, and then you see everything that happens thereafter. And you just take a lot of really strong things away from it. One, Dave Aranda, integrity. Wow. Like, he could have pushed this thing as far as he wanted to go. And that could have hurt the eligibility of both quarterbacks going forward. He could have easily strung this thing out into the fall. But if he felt compelled to pick a starter at this point, and he obviously went with Shapen, if he felt that good about it, he should go through with it. But a lot of coaches don't. We see a lot of battles that are still going on right now. And now it's the offseason, right? So you can't really do anything about it. So now those quarterbacks are locked into thinking, okay, I have to contend through fall camp to have a chance to play. So then if you hit the portal at that point, guess what? We're beyond May 1st, so you can't participate until 2023. So it is an adaptation of the current game and calendar around college football, but also an example of integrity from Dave Aranda to give Gerry Bohanon that chance to say, hey, if you're going to hit the portal, we don't want you to, but if you're going to hit it, we get it. Go ahead and hit it, and you can play somewhere in 2022. We're going to go with Shapen. And that says a lot about the type of program Dave is running and what wants to run at the same time. 2, conviction. Man, to go against the guy who got you there takes a lot. Now, we've seen these leaps of faith pay off at other programs. Alabama basically moving on from Jalen Hurts. Oklahoma and Lincoln Riley moving on from Spencer Rattler to Caleb Williams. Now he obviously gets him with another chance there at Southern Cal. Of course, USC, I was going to say USC, but USC East is where Spencer Rattler is anyway.
Right,
so
right.
We've seen this conviction pay off, at least in principle, at a lot of schools. So I do respect that element of Dave Aranda because it takes a lot. It takes a lot to put your neck on the line that way because he's going to be judged with this decision or on this decision the rest of the way. Now it's going to tell us, okay, we think great things of you. We appreciate the integrity that you've shown in allowing Bohanon to move on, but did you make the right call? And now he's got to deal with that from May all the way, in theory, to December. So these 7 months will be interesting to judge in that regard, but he obviously felt compelled to do it, and that is something to respect and lift up as well. So if you have a coach that's willing to adapt to the modern asks of college football, consider the players, which is something that, college football fans have been complaining about forever. And then to have the conviction to actually pull the trigger, you have to respect that, even if it doesn't work out for Baylor. And I hope Baylor fans understand all the big you-know-what that it took to get to that conclusion with those 2 quarterbacks. But if you watch the spring game, you see why at the same time, right? Like Shapen offers you more consistency from the pocket, efficiency as an accurate thrower. I mean, he led multiple touchdown drives. The 50-yarder was gorgeous. The timing of the back shoulder fade ball worked out as well. I get it. I see it with my limited sample. So imagine if that was expanded, obviously, which is what Dave Aranda and that coaching staff got to deal with.
John, the big question this week has not been so much on Blake Shapen, but more on Gerry Bohanon and where he'll go, because there's so many Baylor fans that hail him as a hero, and I think he deserves the legend status for Baylor because he goes from 2-7 season Charlie Brewer, takes over at the helm, and helps lead a team to 12-2 in a Sugar Bowl. But before that, I do want to give a little time to Blake Shapen and what he brings in the starting role. And I've heard a lot of people, Jeff Grimes is the OC. I've heard a lot of people throw out the name Zach Wilson and what Zach Wilson did at BYU. And can Jeff Grimes develop Blake Shapen into that? Do you see a comparison there, or really in general, what is Blake Shapen going to bring to that starting quarterback role?
Yeah, I think from a stature standpoint, you could start to make some similarities, as well as the time that Wilson took over at BYU is about the time that Shapen has been at Baylor. So you understand kind of the projection element of, okay, like, yes, Bohanon tangibly has gotten us here, but we think going forward, and again, we're talking 4, 5, 6 months down the road, Shapen gives us the best chance to win. You can understand the projection element of the pick. Zach Wilson was the number 2 pick in the draft, rocket arm, really mobile. I think Shapen has some mobility, more functional mobility. You're not going to design runs for either guy in principle, but they can move if they have to. So I do see some similarities in that regard. But really, I think it's from an efficiency standpoint. I think that's really where you say, what is the culture of Baylor football? Well, it's smart, it is hard-nosed, tough on defense, and in your face on offense. Well, there's really two ways to look at it from the quarterback position. You want a guy who is either physically able to do so, like we saw with Bohanon last year, where the running element was a really important part of the offense, or a guy who's not going to turn the football over, who can play efficiently and accurately to make sure that the strongest elements of the team are lifted up and put on the line when it comes to wins and losses in the fourth quarter and all of those things. And I think that's where Shapen can start to craft that argument as to why he was a better pick. So I can see the foundation of the argument and why the pick was made. Wilson comparisons are a little early for me. But look, we weren't talking about Zach Wilson leading into that breakout year either. So that's the nature of college football. And guys who have been there and done that, like Aranda, like Grimes, do deserve that benefit of the doubt, at least on the front end.
John, on the other side, Gerry Bohanon now transferring out of the program. I know he visited Missouri earlier this week. Coming out of high school, he was a guy that could have played linebacker at almost any school that he really wanted to. I know he was on a trip to Alabama with Nick Saban, out of Earl, Arkansas, just a mountain of a man. And now he's finding a new home at the QB position. Is there any one landing spot that would just be great to coddle our boy? That's how I'm going to put it.
Yeah, Missouri's interesting. That offense is really wide open, very pass dominant. I think if Bohanon wanted to say, hey, I want to prove to the NFL scouts that I can sit back and throw it as much as these traditional spread guys, I think that would make a lot of sense. Now, if we're talking about utilizing his entire skill set in a proven system, I think other schools would make more sense. I look at a school, I think you go to the Pac-12, Arizona State certainly needs a quarterback. One of the most shocking transfers before this one at the position was Jaden Daniels leaving ASU for LSU. I think that would make a lot of sense. And then I always think of transition coaching staffs that are in year one at their new school, just trying to navigate and figure out, how in the world do we put out a truly competitive product from day one. So my brain went to Washington, where there's a lot of unproven quarterback talent there. My brain has gone to other schools with first-year coaches as well. I think it's wide open. Illinois would make some sense in my mind as well. It really could depend on the timing. How quickly, with this shocking news, how quickly did schools pounce on the opportunity to host Bohanon? And obviously Missouri is the tangible one that we know of. The home state Arkansas Razorbacks have a guy in place for 22, but is he willing to wait? Is he willing to sit a year and maybe develop as the backup, and go home? Something like that I think could come into play as well relative to the battles that are no longer ongoing at some of these schools. But my brain always goes to transition staffs or schools that are dealing with a lot of youth. Arizona State, Missouri, fit that mold as well. So it is really fascinating to see where he ends up. We know there's a true dual threat, a big physical body that will enhance any quarterback room when he does make that decision, and I'll certainly be tuned in on it.
John, for the first time on Locked On Baylor that you have joined, we have yet to mention a high school recruit or really anything generally specific, anything specific about recruiting. So I want to flip all of that on its head to a recruiting standpoint. I am a 17-year-old four-star high school guy from Duncanville, and I see Dave Aranda tell Gerry Bohanon, hey, you're the backup. You have time to transfer, but I'm going with the younger guy, a 2-year guy instead of a 4-year guy. What do I, in my 17-year-old brain, what should I think?
I should think, hey, these adults who are texting me and keeping me abreast of this situation, I'm going to listen to those people, because I guarantee you, if I was impressed with it from an integrity standpoint, high school coaches, parents, current college players, everyone around the sport who has invested into it more than a 17-year-old has to this point has to be impressed by either the integrity or the conviction behind what Dave Aranda just did. And again, all of that coming off of the high of what Baylor did in 21 and now 22 in regards to the NFL draft. That should put Baylor on more radars. Or if they're already on radar, that should say, hey, you're worried about coaching stability, which has become an important topic in recruits picking a school. This is stable. This kind of leadership, this kind of decision-making, unconventional, yes. Stable, absolutely. This is the type of going out on a limb that makes you known and well known relative to your school. And I think that's why right now Dave Aranda is the face of Baylor football. It's not a quarterback, it's not a player. It is Dave Aranda, for better or for worse. But I think if you talk to high school coaches, parents, even players in particular, that is something that, again, they will give him the benefit of the doubt on.
John, I want to thank you so much, as always, for joining this week. For everybody at home that wants to find your stuff and your continued recruiting news, where do they go?
Real simple, si.com/college, or check us out on Twitter at JohnGarcia_JR.
Perfect. John, thanks again, as always, because this is just freaking good stuff, man.
Always fun, man. Always fun. You keep it light. You keep it to the point, and you keep it about ball, and you keep it moving the right way as well. So
hey, next week's calculus. Like you spoke too soon. Next week we're going to calculus. I'm going to ask you the Pythagorean theorem. Memorize it between now and then. There's a song.
Gotcha. I got you.
I love it. Thanks again, John.
All right, boss. Take care.
See ya. Well, folks at home, I want to tell you about betonline.net, because betonline.net has been my go-to place. Before we get into Matthew Mayer, by the way, we're about to talk Matthew Mayer and his decision to enter the transfer portal or stay in the NBA draft. BetOnline.net is the place to go right now for online live betting, esports, gaming. You've got the NBA playoffs that are going on right now, which are huge, apparently, as well as Major League Baseball. You can do live betting for those, which is one of my favorite features. Live over-unders and whatnot. Say two teams are at 100 to 100, okay, with 4 minutes to go. And the live over-under is 223. Then you can pick over or under. That's what that means. So I have utilized that feature, of course, and you can too at betonline.net. Head to the website today. Use your mobile device. Super easy, super accessible. Bet online, where the game starts. Okay. Matthew Mayer has made the announcement that he will enter the transfer portal. So as you know, Mayer has declared for the NBA draft and is testing the NBA draft waters. Now, I use that term really specifically because I'm not sure that Matthew Mayer is in a position to be drafted in the only 2 rounds of the NBA draft. I just don't think I see that happening right now. He has the NBA archetype. We've mentioned that before, but I know the decision to enter the transfer portal behooves him because I just don't see him being drafted, and maybe he wants to chase a career overseas or a career in the G League and start there and try to work his way up, maybe so. But B, and more importantly, he can't come back to Baylor. Okay, Drake, why can't he come back to Baylor? You're not going to let the guy back. I mean, he averaged 10 points a game last year, was a team leader as a senior. He's been at Baylor for 4 years. Why can't he come back? Well, there's not enough scholarships. So I can only imagine that Adam Flagler will return to Baylor. I just don't see a world in which Adam Flagler stays in the NBA draft and decides to go pro. I don't think he would be. I'm 199 point, as many nines as you can get, % positive that Adam Flagler is not going to go to the NBA. He's not going to play overseas. He's not going to play in the G League. Adam Flagler is coming back to play for Scott Drew next season. You can hold me to that. If Flagler comes back, when you factor in the transfers that have now come to the program, you don't have a scholarship left for Matthew Mayer. So it is either go to the NBA or go to a different program for a guy that's kind of getting late in the game for both. So Mayer last season, 33 games, 22.8 minutes. So he played 23 minutes last year compared to 16 minutes the year before. In 2020, the 2021 season, he averaged 8 points. When his minutes were boosted, he averaged 9.8 points. So not a huge jump there. We didn't see a ton of progress between junior and senior season, especially like we did from sophomore to junior season. And I said he's got the archetype he does, and I think he has NBA potential. But right now, if you're looking at his college stats, you almost see a regression from junior to senior year amongst a lot of these stats. Field goal percentage being one of them. He shot 49% his junior year. His senior year, he shot 41%. Pretty big gap in between those. 3-point baskets as well. He shot 40% his junior year. His senior year, he shot 32%. So you're looking at a guy in Matthew Mayer that when scouts see him, what do they think? Well, he's got the size. He's got the build. He stands at 6'9", 225 pounds. He's a small forward, a power forward, has a size for the NBA, has solid defense that developed last season. But I still don't think, being a fourth-year guy, seniors just don't really get drafted. It's not near as typical now in the age of guys that are leaving high school, not playing college ball, going to the overtime league or whatever, and then end up going to the NBA. So it's tough to find a guy that is 22.6 years old, to be exact, that is going to go to the NBA and be drafted. I think the best decision for Matthew Mayer then is to stay in college. He can't stay at Baylor. And that's not such a bad thing necessarily for Scott Drew and the Bears, because now Caleb Lohner has come to town from BYU. He stands at 6'8", 6'9". You have Jalen Bridges, who's coming from West Virginia, who stands 6'9" as well. Both of those guys at 6'8", 6'9" can man the power forward position, can play small forward as well, and filter themselves into Scott Drew's offense, the defense of the Bears as well, in a role that's very similar to Matthew Myers. Both those guys have great size and can fill athletic but big forward positions for the Baylor Bears. So the loss of Matthew Mayer is inevitable. I'm going to go ahead and put the final stamp on it on this show. Matthew Mayer will not be returning to Baylor, because if he made the decision to return to college in general, Baylor would have to clear out something to make room for one more scholarship player in Matthew Mayer. So I believe it is going to be next year's starting five: Keontae George, Adam Flagler, LJ Cryer, Jalen Bridges, Flo Thamba. That's the starting five, in my opinion, right now. That doesn't change. I said that like a week ago. And with Matthew Mayer declaring he's entering the transfer portal just so he has that option alive, it again reiterates the fact that those five guys are your starting five, and Matthew Mayer will not be returning to Baylor. Lock that in. He's either going to the NBA, playing professionally somewhere, or he's going to play for a different college next season. Now, there are plenty of schools that I'm sure would love to have Mayer. Granted, like I said, his stat line did not improve that much from junior to senior season. There was a regression there, but even still, he's a national champion who's played under Scott Drew for 4 years and could contribute at a Power 5 level or for a pretty solid team next season. I'm sure there are plenty that will want to take him, and I wish him the best in his career. But Matthew Mayer will never again be a Baylor Bear on the floor for Scott Drew. Now, I want to thank you all for joining Locked On Baylor today and making it your first listen every single day. Make your second listen Locked On in Big 12. Get all your daily Big 12 news in less than 30 minutes with Big 12 expert Josh Neighbors, free and available wherever you get your podcast. And tomorrow's Locked On Baylor show, Coach Mike Neighbors joins us to talk Baylor women's basketball transfers. There are 3 of them. He has scouted consistently 2 of them in the SEC, and who knows a player's skill set better than the man who scouted him multiple times trying to prepare for him. And he says, well, 2 of them in Asia Blackwell and Dre Edwards are matchup nightmares. That's coming up tomorrow, as well as men's and women's tennis recaps, where they find out, well, they have found out now. We're going to break it down tomorrow, where they will play in the NCAA tournament. I'm Drake Toll, and as always, this has been, subscribe, like it, share it, Locked On Baylor.